History has known many kings. Some were born with a crown already on their head, some inherited vast empires, some ruled for what seemed like an eternity. But only one man rose from nothing, seized an entire continent, and then lost it all. This isn't just a story about war and conquest. It's a story of raw ambition, of unmatched genius, of an ego that touched the sun, and of a destiny that would shake the world. This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who conquered Europe only to die alone on a remote island. How did one person achieve so much and fall so far? Join us as we uncover the epic life of the emperor. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that shaped our world. Did you know the man who would one day conquer Europe was never truly French? Napoleon Bonaparte was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, and back then, Corsica was its own world. Its people didn't feel French, and neither did he. He spoke French with a thick accent, and at school, he was the outsider. He was mocked, bullied, and ignored. But that isolation forged something powerful, something dangerous inside him. He learned a harsh lesson very early on. The world doesn't just give you respect, it has to be taken. So, Napoleon didn't dream small. He devoured history books, studying the greats, Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne. He wasn't content to just read about history. He was determined to become it, and that burning ambition would soon set the entire world on fire. Follow 4 more stories of the people who shaped our world. Ever wonder what makes a legend? Is it born talent, or something else entirely? Let's talk about a young man who entered military school with none of the usual advantages. He wasn't tall or particularly handsome. He wasn't born into a powerful family, and he certainly wasn't the life of the party. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, and while he lacked physical presence, he possessed something far more dangerous, a mind built for war. While his classmates were out chasing fun and fleeting pleasures, Napoleon was hunched over books and maps. He wasn't just passing time, he was forging a weapon. He devoured everything he could about the art of conflict. He mastered artillery, understanding its devastating power on the battlefield. He dove deep into mathematics, seeing the numbers behind every troop movement and every cannonball's arc. He studied logistics, grasping that an army marches on its stomach and that supply lines are as vital as soldiers. And most importantly, he studied strategy, learning from the great generals of history, analyzing their victories and their failures. To others, war was a storm of chaos, a terrifying whirlwind of chance and violence. But to Napoleon, it was different. He saw it as a grand, intricate equation, a problem to be solved. Every valley, every river, every hill on a map was a variable he could manipulate. He could see the battle before it even began, playing out scenarios in his mind, calculating risks, and planning 10 steps ahead of his enemy. War wasn't just a passion for him, it was a science, and he was its most dedicated student. Then, history intervened. The French Revolution erupted, turning the nation upside down. The old order was shattered, and with it, the traditional military hierarchy. Experienced officers, loyal to the old regime, were either executed or fled the country. Suddenly, France was in desperate need of new leaders, men of talent and ambition, regardless of their background. The stage was set, and as the nation cried out for a hero, for a commander who could save it from its enemies, Napoleon was there. He wasn't just ready, he was perfectly prepared. The years of quiet study were over. It was time to put the calculations into practice. Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by the minds that shape history, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Imagine this: France is in utter chaos. The king has been executed, the old system has crumbled, and all of Europe is lining up to crush the revolution. It's a time of desperation, but for one young officer, it's a moment of pure opportunity. His name is Napoleon Bonaparte. At the critical siege of Toulon, the French are stalled. But Napoleon, a relatively unknown artillery captain, sees what no one else does. He masterfully positions his cannons, unleashing a precise and devastating bombardment that completely shatters the enemy defenses. The city falls, and the victory is decisive. Overnight, Napoleon is promoted. At just 24 years old, he is made a general. In the midst of turmoil and uncertainty, France had just found its most powerful weapon, and the world would never be the same. In 1796, France was in chaos. The revolution had devoured its own, and the nation was surrounded by enemies. A young, unknown general named Napoleon Bonaparte was given a seemingly impossible task: lead the battered, starving army of Italy. The government in Paris didn't expect much. They just wanted him to keep the Austrians and their allies busy, a distraction, a sideshow. They sent him to fail. But Napoleon had other plans. He arrived to find an army in tatters. The soldiers were demoralized, lacking food, pay, and even proper shoes. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and on the verge of mutiny. Any other general would have despaired, but Napoleon saw an opportunity. He spoke to his men not as a distant commander, but as one of them. He promised them glory, honor, and the riches of Italy's fertile plains. He promised them victory, and they believed him. What followed was one of the most brilliant military campaigns in history. With lightning speed, Napoleon moved his forces through the Alps. He didn't fight the war his enemies expected. He broke all the rules. He would isolate enemy armies and destroy them one by one before they could unite. At Montenotte, Millesimo, Dego Seva, and Mondove, he shattered the Sardinian forces, forcing them to sue for peace in just 2 weeks. The path to Lombardy was open, but the Austrians were still there, confident in their numbers. Napoleon met them at the bridge of Lodi. He knew taking the bridge would be a bloodbath, but it was essential. He placed himself at the very front, inspiring his men to charge into a storm of cannon fire. They called him the Little Corporal after that, a term of endearment for a general who fought alongside his men. Throughout the campaign, Napoleon was a whirlwind of energy. He marched with his soldiers, slept in the same cold fields, and shared their meager rations. He knew their names, their hometowns. He didn't command from a gilded tent miles away. He led from the cannon's mouth. His soldiers didn't just follow him, they worshipped him. They would follow him anywhere, through fire and ice, because they knew he was with them. One by one, the mighty Austrian armies sent to stop him were annihilated. At Castiglione, at Arcole, at Rivoli, Napoleon's tactical genius turned desperate situations into stunning triumphs. He outmaneuvered and outfought generals with decades more experience. Within a year, northern Italy was conquered, and the Austrian Empire was humbled. Europe was left in stunned silence. This wasn't just another general. This was a force of nature. A 27-year-old had redrawn the map of Europe and announced his arrival on the world stage. The Italian campaign wasn't a sideshow. It was the beginning of an era. The age of Napoleon had begun. Ever wondered what drove Napoleon Bonaparte? It wasn't just about conquering Europe. He was chasing something bigger, a legacy, an empire to rival Alexander the Great. So, in 1798, he set his sights on the east, leading his army into the sands of Egypt. On land, his Grande Armée was unstoppable, crushing the Mamluk forces at the Battle of the Pyramids. He felt like a modern-day pharaoh, with dreams of marching all the way to India. But then, the sea turned against him. At the Battle of the Nile, the British Royal Navy, led by Admiral Nelson, completely annihilated his fleet. Suddenly, the conqueror was trapped. His army was stranded, his supply lines cut. For most, this would be the end. But not for Napoleon. He was a master of spinning the story. He abandoned his army, snuck back to France, and declared the expedition a massive success, bringing back tales of scientific discovery and glory. And France believed him. He returned not as a failure, but as a hero ready to seize power. Thanks for watching. Imagine France, late 1790s. The revolution has been a whirlwind of chaos, uncertainty, and constant conflict. The people, they're exhausted. They're retired of the instability and desperately crave order and a strong leader to guide them out of the mess. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte, a brilliant military general. He sees his opportunity. In 1799, he launches a bold coup d'etat, a swift seizure of power. He overthrows the existing government and establishes himself as the first consul of France. But Napoleon's ambition didn't stop there. Just a few years later, in 1804, he takes his power to the ultimate level. In a grand ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral, he doesn't wait for the Pope to crown him. No, he takes the crown and places it on his own head. This was a powerful statement to the entire world. He wasn't given power, he took it. He was a self-made emperor, indebted to no one. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, imagine one man rewriting the rules for an entire continent. That was Napoleon Bonaparte. He didn't just win battles, he rebuilt society from the ground up. He gave France the Napoleonic Code, a legal system so revolutionary that it still influences laws around the world today. He modernized education, streamlined the government, and supercharged the economy. But his ambition didn't stop at France's borders. On the battlefield, he was a genius. He took on the great powers of Europe, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and, defeated them one by one. At the height of his power, he controlled most of Europe. Kings trembled before him, and ancient empires bowed. He seemed absolutely unstoppable, a force of nature reshaping the world in his image. Or so it seemed. The story of his rise is incredible, but the story of his fall is just as dramatic. Have you ever heard the saying, "Power corrupts"? Well, Napoleon Bonaparte is a prime example of how absolute power can change a person. As he conquered nation after nation, his self-belief transformed into something much more dangerous. He started to think he was incapable of making a mistake, that he was physically unable to lose a battle. He even began to see himself not just as a great leader, but as the very embodiment of destiny. This godlike complex led him to make a huge error, invading Spain. He expected a quick victory, but instead, he was met with brutal guerrilla warfare that slowly bled his grand army dry. But even that wasn't his biggest blunder. Fueled by his unwavering belief in his own invincibility, Napoleon made one final, fatal decision that would seal his fate and change the course of history forever. What was it? Let's find out. Subscribe for more. Imagine this: 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte, the master of Europe, stands at the head of the largest army the continent has ever seen, over 500,000 men. His target, the vast Russian Empire. It seemed like an unstoppable force, a guaranteed victory. But the Russians had a brutal, genius strategy. They refused to fight a decisive battle. Instead, they retreated deeper and deeper into their homeland. And as they retreated, they burned everything in their path: crops, villages, supplies. This was the scorched earth policy. Napoleon's Grande Armée pushed all the way to a deserted, burning Moscow, but found no surrender and no food. Then, the infamous Russian winter arrived early and with a vengeance. Temperatures plummeted, starvation and disease took their toll. The once mighty army was forced into a hellish retreat. Of the 600,000 men who marched in, fewer than 100,000 made it out alive. It was a catastrophic failure, the beginning of the end for Napoleon. The myth of his invincibility was shattered, frozen in the Russian snow. The year is 1814. Europe breathes a collective sigh of relief. The great disturber, Napoleon Bonaparte, is finally defeated. After years of war that redrew the map of the continent, the French emperor is forced to abdicate and is exiled to the tiny island of Elba. The Bourbon monarchy is restored in France, and the old powers of Europe believe they've finally put the genie back in the bottle. For them, the story is over. A new era of peace can begin, but they were wrong. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the intermission. After less than a year, in a move of unbelievable audacity, Napoleon escapes from Elba. He lands in France with a handful of loyal soldiers, and what happens next is the stuff of legend. The world, which thought it had seen the last of him, holds its breath. The emperor is back, and the 100 days have begun. Have you heard of the 100 days? It sounds like a fairy tale, but it was Napoleon Bonaparte's last, desperate gamble for power. After escaping exile from the island of Elba, he landed in France, and the nation rallied behind him once more. For 100 days, he was emperor again, defying all of Europe. But this comeback story has a tragic end. At the Battle of Waterloo, everything went wrong. Heavy rain turned the battlefield into a muddy swamp, delaying Napoleon's attack. Costly mistakes were made, and his legendary military genius seemed to fail him. The combined forces of the British and Prussians proved too much. This time, there was no triumphant return, only final defeat, and exile to a remote island, St. Helena, where he would die. It was the dramatic, final act of one of history's most epic lives. Picture this: the year is 1815. The man who once held Europe in the palm of his hand, Napoleon Bonaparte, has been defeated for the final time. Where do you send a figure of such monumental ambition? Not to a comfortable retirement, but to a remote, windswept rock in the middle of the vast Atlantic Ocean, St. Helena. Imagine the contrast. From commanding armies of hundreds of thousands, from redrawing the map of a continent, to this: no more grand palaces, no more cheering crowds, no more power, just the endless ocean, a handful of attendants, and the crushing weight of his own memory. He spent his days dictating his memoirs, gardening, and staring out at the sea that had become his prison. 6 years later, in 1821, the former emperor died, thousands of miles from the land he once ruled. A dramatic end to a legendary life. Thanks for watching. Ever wondered how Napoleon, one of history's greatest military minds, ended up defeated and exiled? It wasn't just one bad battle, it was a slow burn of his own making. Imagine winning so much that you start to believe you're invincible. That was Napoleon. His confidence, once his greatest asset, became his biggest blind spot. He dragged France into endless wars, always needing one more victory, one more piece of land. He couldn't stop. It was like he was addicted to winning. He truly believed he was a man of destiny, that fate was on his side no matter what. This belief made him deaf to advice and blind to the grim reality facing his exhausted armies and nation. In the end, Napoleon had conquered most of Europe, but he couldn't conquer his own ambition. He lost not to his enemies, but to himself. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more history deep dives. Have you ever wondered what it takes to conquer the world, and what it costs to lose it all? Napoleon Bonaparte, a name etched in history, gives us the ultimate lesson. He showed everyone that power is the ultimate reward for relentless ambition. From a humble officer to the Emperor of France, he redrew the map of Europe with his brilliant military mind. He had it all: an empire, glory, and unimaginable power. But power has a dark side. It punishes excess. Napoleon's ambition became his undoing, leading him from the grand palaces of Paris to a lonely exile. His story is a powerful reminder of how even the greatest thrones can fall. This is the epic rise and tragic fall of a man who touched the sun, only to be burned. Join us as we explore his incredible journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more.